online session. We had, I think, 9 people last night, and I put the recording up if you care to watch it. And I'll do the same with this one. And you all know who I am, Sharon Pristash, and I am the instructor for this course. I am a principal of a Catholic school here in Cave Creek, Arizona. And I was also a principal in Duluth, and I was also a teacher in Duluth. And I'm an alumni of St. Scholastica, so I'm very familiar with the area. And I thought we'd start with Emily, and then we'll just go around. Everybody, just let everybody know who you are and where you are and what you teach.
I'm Emily Mogren. I teach at Vadnais Heights Elementary in the White Bear School District, and I'm an interventionist.
Grant.
I'm Grant Rindall. I teach in Thorpe, Wisconsin, and I teach high school math.
Laura.
I'm Laura Bacher. I teach 5th grade in St. Cloud.
Rebecca.
Hi, I teach at Willow River Schools, and I teach 1st grade.
Sky.
Hi, I'm Sky.
Oh, you froze. Is everybody there?
My computer's done.
Yeah, it's froze for a minute.
I'm in Florida and I teach autism. I'm supposed to be doing pre-K, but I'm helping out in a K-5 unit.
And you just lived through Dorian. That wasn't quite as bad as you thought.
No, it just went right off the coast. I was very grateful for that. My house wouldn't have taken it.
Pollyann.
Hi, I teach 4th grade in Two Harbors, Minnesota.
Jake.
Hey everybody, I'm Jake Mack. I teach science, 7th and 8th grade up in Roseville, Minnesota, so near the Canadian border.
Do you snowmobile?
Yeah, snowmobile and hockey and ice fish.
That would be a must.
Yep.
Brandon. Oh, can't hear you. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. While Brendan figures that out, let's go to Sydney. Are you there, Sydney? We can't see you.
I know, I'm here. I'm trying to get another computer. My webcam isn't working right now, so I will get that going. But I am living in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I teach 7th grade math. So, yep.
All right. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Brandon. So I wanted to start out a little bit like the online discussion that you were posting, and just share with all of us. Just pipe in whenever you'd like your thoughts on the readings and the videos that you've viewed so far, and what have you taken so far from the course materials that you found interesting?
I'd just say like how important all the resources talked about, like consistently building in high levels of thinking into every lesson, and just how like no matter what a student's level of ability is, the more that you can push them to higher levels of thinking, the better it's going to be for them. And it's not something that like you turn on overnight. It's something that's consistently built. And so just I get to work with students for 4 years at the high school that I teach. And so like consistently asking them as freshmen to think critically all the way through when they're seniors in math, you can really see like expect a lot of growth even in the students that struggle or are behind grade level. It's still really, really important for them to think critically.
To piggyback off Grant, I work with struggling students every day. That's my job. And so, yeah, I think it was Willingham's mentioned that even, 3-year-olds can think critically. And I think that's true. I think young kids can be asked why they believe something, and you can dig deep into, I mean, it might be more appropriate for a 3-year-old to talk about why it would be important to tie shoes, you know, to think critically around that, about that, versus what you would ask high school students or adults. But I think it just looks different, you know, for grade level or ability level. Like I said, I work with struggling readers and mathematicians, and you know, I do my best to try to even ask, you know, why do, you know, ask those critical thinking, you know, higher order thinking skills every day.
Emily, you kind of nailed it on the head for me. Like when you said that, what it looks like. For first grade, I keep thinking like I can't teach higher level thinking because we're so basic. We're so like at the beginning. But I need to think outside of the box because it is there. I just need to train myself to understand where it is, and just, you know, with some growth mindset talking and trainings that I've had personally, and then like with reiterating with my class, I put in one of the discussions, and I don't know if it's with this class or in a different class, but one of the kids, we were asked a general question, and when I called him, he made the wrong answer, and like 3 of my kids were like, he made a mistake, and we're clapping, and it kind of went back to that growth mindset. Like we celebrated it, we all applauded and like high-fived them, and I don't know what growth mindset looks to everyone. I think it's a little bit a gray area. It can look different from me to you, but especially with young kids. But I don't know. To me, that was kind of it. Like we're taking us to the next line, and I guess that's where I'm going with it. The second week of school.
I like that you talked about the growth mindset, because that came up when I was reading as well, thinking about just teaching students to think about how they're thinking. And I mean, that's something that is fairly new to me. I just focus so much on the content and thinking about the processes that we use and the features and the patterns that we see, and constantly relating content to each other to build that background knowledge. That came up a lot in the reading. So I like that you talk about the growth mindset, because you think a lot about your thinking and your mistakes, and about just taking time to intentionally analyze what you're doing every day. And that's what kind of stuck with me with the critical thinking reading, the chapter that we read when they talked about recognizing the features and patterns. That's kind of what stuck with me.
So sorry, you guys. I'm not able to get my camera working, but I will do my best to just speak, and hopefully you can hear me fine. With that being said, I think that like a lot of things that I try to incorporate with the growth mindset and just like learning from their mistakes, I try to do a lot of letting the students reflect. And so instead of just handing back tests and quizzes, I mean, I'm in 7th grade math classes, so it might look a little bit different compared to obviously elementary school or early elementary school. But instead of just handing it back with feedback, I have them go through and actually fill out a sheet, like a reflection sheet that says, it says like, why did I get this wrong? What can I do to get it correct next time? And then it also says like, it has like 3 steps that I could take in order to get it correct in the future, or like learn from my mistakes. So like maybe students are completing IXL, or maybe they're watching a video on it. So it's just like really taking the time to learn from their mistakes, and then also teaching them how to use resources that they have so that they can learn from those mistakes.
I think also not only teaching our students to think critically, but to be able to talk about it and explain it is an important part of it. I know that we talk a lot in professional development about doing things called math talks, where they have to turn and talk to partners and be able to explain in their own language how they've done things and how they thought critically about things. And that's another component to critical thinking, is being able to recognize when you're doing it and explain it to someone else.
I agree. I thought that the math talk video that we watched with the 3rd grade, I believe it was, that really, because at first I thought critical thinking, couldn't wrap my mind exactly around what that would look like. And then watching that video, it was like, oh, we are doing some of these things in the classroom and exploring different sides of things, the decomposing of numbers. And I thought that really helped me through the course to kind of, that first lesson there, to understand more about what critical thinking looks like in an elementary classroom.
They did a really good job too. That class was on task the whole time.
The cameras were on.
I think one thing that I've found interesting, just kind of looking at the readings and underlying theme, is how when we approach education right now, it's very compartmentalized, and meaning that we have transitions for students as they move from one subject to the next. And the same thing when we look at standards here in Minnesota at the very least. And especially to talk about the difference between experts and novices is the idea that there are generalized strategies, heuristics that you can use from problem solving. And when we look at that in education, we should think much more in an interdisciplinary approach. I think there isn't enough of that in teaching right now. I'm really interested in having co-teaching as a possibility. I know it seems unrealistic with staffing and FTEs and things like that, but those are really thought-provoking to me, is because we train our students from a very early age to transition from subject to subject to subject, when there's so much to be said about tying those together and having more an interdisciplinary nature in how we learn. So that seems to be a reoccurring theme for me reading just what we've gone through in this chapter so far for critical thinking.
Yeah, I'd pick up on that. It kind of seems like students can't have a difficulty saying that it's the big ideas that help you understand these problems. It's not just solely in math that you can memorize all these formulas, because once you memorize them and you stop using them, they go away. But same thing within any class. But if you really learn those big ideas, okay, I'm kind of think about it in this way, kind of work it from there, see if that's right. And that's kind of what you do in all problem-solving classes. So I think you're exactly right on trying to teach more of those big ideas that can be connected to any class, not just, the facts and the recall are important for building that basic knowledge, but it needs to be significantly more than that.
Do any of you think that you are encouraging and promoting critical thinking within your classroom now to any level that you'd be willing to share? What are some ways that you believe you are doing that?
I know that in my class right now, it's first grade. I'm just trying to teach my kids how to get a pencil without fighting. But that being said, I have high hopes. I want to, on Fridays, kind of leave my schedule a little bit more open and thinking, especially with math. And we haven't started our rotations yet. That probably won't happen until maybe, I'm hoping, beginning of October. But it's coming. I think for the more primary grades, you have to build that stamina before you can release that independence. And I'm very optimistic and I'm hopeful. I know all summer I was super pumped up and geared up for it. And now that I'm in getting in the trenches, I'm kind of freaking out. I have a really squirrely class this year, but we'll get there. It's important, and I know it's important. And maybe that's more me than them, trying to make sure that, letting go. I think a part of it is the teacher needing to let go of that control and letting them just do it, because I think we kind of, as teachers, underestimate kids at times, and maybe that's just me as a first grade teacher, but they surprise me, and we're getting there. And it's a goal of mine, because if you don't have it, I feel like, I don't know, your class is kind of stagnant, I guess, for lack of a better word.
I'd like to carry off of what Rebecca was saying. He's not my student yet, but just an example. I have a child I'm going to be working with. Everyone that's worked with this child has said the lights are on, nobody's home. But today I was asking him some higher order thinking questions, and everyone around me was like, that child doesn't do these things, but he was answering correctly. They all underestimated him.
Yeah, we do often underestimate children at all ages, I think.
Like saying he can't talk, he doesn't understand.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
We lost you, Rebecca.
Oh, I interrupted. I apologize and said she can continue. I'm sorry.
You're good. I was done.
Can everyone hear me now?
I'd like to.
Oh, we can hear Brandon.
Okay, cool.
I would like to think that I am always pushing my kids to think critically, but I know that that's the thing that I can always get better at, and something that I feel like I can probably just learn a little bit more about before I start implementing it further. But I'm teaching a high achievement cluster of fifth graders this year, so my goal is to make sure that everything that we do involves critical thinking. I mean, as you should with any class that you have, but we're trying to do more project-based learning this year, and I think that that's an opportunity where they're going to have to be thinking critically in order to do things like that. So we have started out with some science projects with force and motion, and just kind of let them have at it and experiment, and that kind of forced them to think critically without realizing that they were doing that. So a lot of experimentation, I think, is a way of getting them to think critically at this point, but that's kind of the hope for the whole year.
I come from kind of a unique, I wouldn't say school, but just program that I teach in, as I teach fourth and fifth graders in a week-long program. So I only have them for a week, so it's really hard to go a mile deep and an inch wide in some of the topics and really start critically thinking. But we do relate everything that we do at Starbase, the program that I teach at, to the engineering design process, which fundamentally is a way that you can solve any problem within any form of problems that you have in your life. So it doesn't relate just to engineering. And that's the way that I teach the engineering design process to the students, is that basically anyone can start off with a problem. Then you have to research the problem and come up with possible solutions and choose the best solution. And if you're working just by yourself, you can still use this. If you're working as a team, there's more of a communications piece to it. But at the end, when you go to test your prototype, if it was project-based learning, if whatever project that a student came up with maybe on their own, if it didn't suffice the requirements or the goals of them learning the objective, they would have to redesign and do something different. So in a lot of the lessons that I do teach students, I'll almost not teach all the content and kind of throw them into the activity right away, just to see if some of the students that are some of the higher flyers in the classes that come to visit Starbase can just pick up on it and figure out by reading the instructions, and from me explaining to them just one time kind of what the expectations were and what they could do, as opposed to students who might only be able to grasp like a smaller portion of that lesson, and their critical thinking skills are lower, but they're still critically thinking, where students who absolutely know how to do what was expected of them, I'm going to ask them the higher order thinking skills. So it's a spectrum of critical thinking, is kind of like the way that I look at it. You're never going to be able to have every student in the class be critically thinking at the same level. So it's kind of how I've taken the approach. But in a nutshell, it's just really hard to teach lessons that involve critical thinking when you only have students for 4 hours a day, and half an hour of that is allotted for them having their lunch period. So it's definitely going to be something that I take back to my cohort, that we're going to definitely try to implement more, maybe scaling back on the amount of state standards that we're trying to hit for teachers when they bring their students there, and maybe try to dig a little bit deeper and open them up to some more critical thinking. So
So kind of what you were saying about not all the students maybe thinking as in depth or like as critically. Everyone's at different levels. I do a volume unit, and this is one that's obviously involves a lot of formulas. So it's really easy to allow students to provide students with opportunities to think critically. So I actually give them like pyramids and prisms, and they get to like use water and fill them up and see if they can figure out why the formula is what it is for like the volume of a prism, and then do the same thing with a pyramid. And of course, like some students are able to figure it out right away, understand exactly what the formula is and why it is what it is. But then I also see that like the students then love to learn from each other. So even if like some of them didn't get that information right away, they weren't able to understand why volume formula is what it is, they can still, like the students that did get it will then start to explain it to someone else, and then they'll be able to explain it to somebody else. And so it's just like gives the students more opportunities to work together and collaborate. And then they all are beginning to ask questions and think critically as a class.
Do you all think that teachers sometimes get in the way of critical thinking? I think that might be one of the biggest things, is when you want students to get to a certain place within a certain lesson or a certain unit, and you're walking around formatively assessing. And I mean, as a parent, as a teacher, that's sometimes one of the hardest things. And you need to be metacognitive about the fact that sometimes you need to let students struggle. Because I mean, I've seen it all the way back from when I was student teaching to watching other teachers teach, that you can watch a teacher who's about to engage and maybe kind of spoon feed something when it might not necessarily need to happen, but sometimes it does need to happen. But I think if we're always constantly thinking about that, then it probably wouldn't happen as much. But I think that's one of the limiting factors to students critically thinking, is just too much teacher involvement.
I have to tell myself all the time to bite my tongue and let them just do it themselves. We did an escape room last week, and we gave the kids 2 hint cards that they could use if they needed help. And when a group ran out, you could see them struggling, and I kept inching toward them, and my co-teacher literally grabbed my arm and pulled me away, and she was like, let them do it. But yeah, I always have to remind myself to just let them struggle a little bit, because that's just in my nature to want to help them, because I love them.
I'm the exact same way. And I think part of it too, like we have such a time crunch, and I think a lot of the time we want to help them along so we can keep moving through our curriculum, which obviously is not best for the students. And so, like you said, to really be mindful of making sure that we're allowing the students to think for themselves, and it's okay if they struggle and try to learn from it. That's obviously going to benefit them in the long run.
And I think too, providing them with that background of how to communicate effectively so they can have these discussions. So giving them that structure, that's where we are kind of in my class right now. We're 2 weeks in, and we've been working a lot on how to communicate effectively and how to have a conversation, because some 4th graders don't know how to have a conversation and, let someone else speak and then take turns, and how to respond to someone when you agree with them or when you disagree. So we've been doing a lot of that for that background so that we can make our way to those deeper conversations later in the year. We've had a few basic conversations, but we're practicing and we're building that foundation so that hopefully they'll be able to kind of run it themselves when we do turn those. So I've been doing a lot of scaffolding there. But I think that was one thing that I was missing before, is I'd say, all right, now let's talk about this, explain your ideas. And then those high flyers would kind of lead the conversation and take over, and some kids can just sit back, and when it's time to share, they would just, oh yeah, that's what they said. And so I think that's something that I've been more intentional about this year with discussions.
Something that I'd like to use with my students that I can't really now, but when I was teaching high school math, I used it quite a bit, was POGIL documents, and process-oriented guided inquiry learning, to where there's different jobs within like a group of students. And one might be the communicator, one might be the note taker, one might be like the timekeeper. There's just different jobs, and you rotate those jobs around just to kind of alleviate the fact that, those high flyers are always going to want to share their ideas, where the person who, isn't communicating that much might have a better way of explaining it that might reach more students in the class than the people who are just able to memorize the formula or do really good on the work. So it's pretty cool. It's all free. If you just like Google POGIL documents, like it'll show you like the framework of how to set up a lesson in it. And it'll actually, like, there's printouts of the role cards, and it'll say what the role is and what everyone's supposed to do within that role. So it's pretty cool.
I'll look into it. Thank you.
I'm glad you threw that question out, Brandon, because I actually threw that out in our discussion last night about, are we—
an example of like getting—
What was that? I thought somebody was speaking. And we had talked last night too about how are we as teachers the ones who are the obstacles.
Oh,
The critical
you're fine. Go ahead. Sorry.
What might be some of the reasons that teachers don't engage their class in critical thinking as much as maybe we should? What are some of the reasons that either avoid it or just don't encourage it.
I would say just pedagogical content knowledge and just content knowledge in general of critical thinking. I think it is, I wouldn't say it's on the forefront of every teacher's list of things to do within the school year. I think that it goes down to that time crunch and around like MCA, test prep, and all of that stuff. It kind of takes a back burner, where when you look at actual like MCA test prep and a lot of that stuff that standard classroom teachers are doing, they wouldn't have to do that if their students knew how to critically think. Like they would just see a word problem and they would figure out a way to engage their prior knowledge of problem solving, and they would be better off solving the problem than trying to reach back to just one strategy that they learned during their test taking strategy sessions for MCA prep. So I would say that teachers need to better themselves on their knowledge of critical thinking and how they could implement to the classroom. And I also think that they need to push back on administration, honestly, and say that it's an important thing. If you have a whole cohort of teachers in a school saying that it's something important that needs to be done, or even at just a grade level, those teachers saying to administration that, hey, we probably should spend more time or do these things because I learned about it here. I'm reading about it during my own professional development. I mean, you can take master's classes all day long, but if you don't have the ability to communicate with the people who are going to let you change things and do things, I mean,
Right. What are some of the outside influences? As teachers, you have many outside influences that sometimes influence you, and you're teaching in ways you wish it wouldn't, but you feel almost compelled. What are some of the...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I have something that I think is kind of interesting too, and I think it's changed a lot with the implementation of technology, is that there's a lot of external pressure to be at a certain point in your curriculum or content. There's always been pressure on educators through content and the standards that we have to meet. But also, too, there's an expectation that you should have your schedule so far in advance, because parents expect you as an educator to know what you'll be doing in 2 weeks because their child will be going on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Or the same can be said for an administrator. So there's times where we're tempted as educators, we want to promote critical thinking skills, but that causes unpredictability in our scheduling.
Mm-hmm.
And then it forces more pressure on us to be able to tell a student 2 weeks from now when they leave for Hawaii what they need to have done for the course. And so it strips us of our discretionary decision making. It causes us to be able to, instead of monitoring where a class is at and being able to make a professional decision on whether we need to slow down in content or potentially speed up if students are doing well, instead we feel tied to the schedule, and hence we take away some of the critical thinking skills to be able to move through the content. We get that temptation, like we talked about earlier, to hand them the answer rather than taking the extra time to have them find it. So I think it's a really interesting topic. It's a new pressure because of technology and scheduling, the transparency that educators are trying to promote. And I understand its value, but there's a balancing act there, if that makes sense to everybody. I don't know. I think it's an interesting topic.
A lot of focus on test scores now, too.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you 100%. And I think another, like when you were saying the worksheets coming home, so parents, where's the worksheets coming home? And you don't do as many of the traditional, worksheet and assessment like that. If you're going through and you're taking a little bit longer to critically think about a topic, or you're focusing on that within a unit, I think there's less of the stuff that you're bringing home. And so I think parents are a big part of the pressure there. Yeah.
They want school to look like it did when they were in school.
So I have a plan sheet. It's just like a Google Doc, and I kind of lay out what each unit is going to look like. But I tell because so many parents, at least I didn't have this as much in my old school district in Rosemont, but now in Connecticut, parents are constantly like trying to get their kid ahead. And so they want basically a whole entire unit laid out for them, knowing exactly what's to come. So I do give them a little outline of what they're going to see, and I have extra resources linked to it for them to see as well. So iExcel or videos, anything for them to view ahead of time. But I also let them know that it is not set in stone, and that obviously if we need to take more time on a topic, because that's what the students need, we're going to slow down. Or if the students are just flying through something, we can speed it up. So like I have a little outline for them, but I make sure that it's very clear up front that it could change. So like if they try to do all their homework ahead of time, like some of that might not even be what they needed to do. So I don't know.
That's where technology is a problem too, I see, because now we're posting lesson plans on RenWeb or Google Classroom. Hi, Andrew. And so parents can see lesson plans on Sunday for the whole week, and they just expect that you're going to follow them, letter for letter. And we all know as good teachers that it's not going to follow exactly your plan, and that things can change, and it makes others uncomfortable sometimes.
Exactly.
I think another interesting external pressure that we face as educators, and it sometimes causes us to step away from critical thinking and promoting that in students, is how difficult it is for us to communicate the results of like project-based learning. Like we're all familiar with a score on a test, right? That can make sense to educators when they sit down and they talk about someone for an IEP meeting, or when we talk to administrators about a specific student having a problem. But once we start to get into a project, and even if it's a rubric that you've placed an assessment for, things become a lot more fluid, right? And it makes people uncomfortable sometimes. We're used to having a test, a traditional multiple choice test. Maybe there's an essay component. When you start to assess students based on skills or what they can demonstrate, then the waters get a lot more murky. So it's our job as educators as a whole to be able to have that common language, to be able to have administrators that feel comfortable with newer practices, or to have parents that are more familiar with the idea of project-based learning. It's a cultural shift. We're long overdue. It's crazy to think that we are taking a master's class that is focusing on learning how to have students think critically. Like that's kind of a benchmark or a measuring stick of where we're at in the U.S. in public education in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about for me too.
I think that's like a generational shift. Like by the time the kids were teaching, get to be adults and parents, like they'll be more accepting of that when they get report cards or standards-based report cards. Because like when you introduce that to parents nowadays, they freak or 90%, 80% grading rubric. And as we as educators shift away from that, they don't understand that. They think, not meeting, they're automatically freaking out and thinking that their kid is not where they're supposed to be, when we all know that that's not the case. When you give a kid a report card and grades in October based on the state
You froze, Rebecca.
standards for the entire year, they theoretically should not meet most of those standards. Oh, wrap their minds around it. What was that?
For a minute you froze, but you're back.
Oh.
I would say the biggest thing for me is just
Sorry. I don't know how much of that you heard.
Most of it. Grant.
I would say like the biggest thing is time, and it's hard to watch students like consistently struggle, especially when you have students that are in different spots, and differentiation is a challenge, and the time component of letting a student struggle for 15-20 minutes on one problem and they get frustrated. I'd say that's the biggest challenge for me, is just knowing how long to let a student struggle and how, like, when it is time to intervene.
I think sometimes peers can actually hold you back too, because like right now I'm in a classroom helping the teacher. I'm trying to get these kids to do things for themselves. And she's like, no, they can't do that. No, they can't do that. You need to help them do this. And it's like, it's frustrating.
It's a balance though, because then students can lose motivation too. If they fail too often, too quickly, I think they can lose motivation to want to try to figure out how to do things. And so there is kind of a wonderfully specific...
You're very quiet, Andrew.
What?
Can you speak a little louder?
Oh, sure. I can scream if you want. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry. No, I said it's true that there's kind of a sweet spot between helping students too much and then letting them struggle so much that they lose motivation to to want to figure things out, because then it's easy for them to either say, somebody will give me the answer eventually, or do I really care anyway? Maybe I don't need to think about this with multiple dimensions. And so there is such a fine balancing act there to retain the motivation.
The specific circumstance I'm talking about here, that she won't even let them try.
Yeah.
She doesn't even give them the time to try because she wants her schedule to flow all the way through.
Andrew, to kind of talk about what you're just talking about, so would it almost be better then, like through whatever subject you are teaching, to kind of like introduce very basic questions as kind of like a whole group thing with classes, to where you kind of get them on a snowball effect and give them those small successes, but have them looking at such a simple problem that they're applying their critical thinking skills to simple problems first, just see kind of like just the basics of looking into the deep structure of what the problem actually is asking for, and not just taking their background knowledge for granted. I don't know, just an idea.
No, I think so. And then I had always thought, yeah, that's how you start people. But then there was one reading, and I don't remember which one it was, that said something about students can't always make transfer from being able to think about one thing critically and then being able to think about something that requires the same kind of thinking. They may not recognize that. So I think within reason, yeah. But maybe it's not a guarantee like I maybe thought it was.
I think I think what you're referring to, I'm just looking at my notes really quick, is the fact that show a student a similar problem to the garden problem, and then they'll most likely think back and realize that it must have a formula to solve it, and that fact that just metacognitive strategies alone aren't going to work. They need something beyond just being able to reach back to a certain way to figure out that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That relates to what Jake said earlier about the interdisciplinary piece, because if we're teaching critical thinking as a skill particular to the discipline, they can use it in geometry or they can use it in physics, but we're not teaching them to critically think in general in all situations.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's hard, is integrated curriculum. It's a big muscle movement that incorporates so many teachers at so many different places to come together to come up with a storyline. But that's kind of the one thing that we do at Starbase, is we have a central theme for our 4th and 5th grade program. The 4th grade program is rocketry and how you're going to get to Mars. Then the 5th grade curriculum, when the students come back to Starbase for the week, is how do you survive on Mars. So it's all theme based, but within all of those different days are studying how mass affects a rocket. So the students are launching air rockets outside and applying different masses to them, measuring with trundle wheels, graphing, but it's all based on launching a rocket to Mars. So there's an immediate investment into something that's actually going on right now. But we also have students writing incomplete sentences. We have them stating the question in their answer. So we're involving the language arts piece into it too, and we've seen like amazing things happen. And I'm sure there's a little bit of a honeymoon effect, just because we are a really cool program and we have awesome technology. But teachers often report back when we reach back out to them that, for the rest of the school year, that students kind of like were in a little bit of a different place, because they were asking questions like, how does this relate to the real world? Or how does this relate to what's going on now? And often teachers would have to take a step back and either come up with an answer, say, hey, I'm going to have to get back to you tomorrow to figure out how it actually does relate to something you might use this skill for in the future. So.
Somebody mentioned that we're shifting, it's kind of a mindset shift in education. And actually, if you've been around as long as I have, and I don't think most of you have in teaching, a lot of this has been there in the past and then not gone quite where we wanted it to go. For example, in the 80s, cooperative learning was the big thing. And who was it that was mentioning about the POGIL? With the different roles within groups, and that was now textbook cooperative group learning. I remember then it kind of faded. Those of you in Minnesota, do you remember when we first instituted the state test back in like the late 90s, 2000? I think it was Bush 2000 when we started all these state standards and these tests. And we had the 8th grade test, but then they had the performance piece. Does anybody remember that? And it was statewide. There were all these different performance, and people could develop them, and then they would put them out there in a database that teachers could use. And so there was this push toward authentic learning and performance assessment, but it stalled, and pretty soon it was just the test. And what caused that? So these interdisciplinary learning, thematic, when I was teaching in the 90s, that was the big push. But it seemed like a few people really went with it, and the rest of the system didn't follow suit.
I was in 5th grade in 1999, so I don't remember that.
It's probably more at the high school level maybe, but I wish I could remember what they called the performance assessments. It was a specific name. And there were teachers who were given like a year's leave from the classroom to produce all these different performance assessments for different courses and different grade levels and topics. But of course, you can imagine that it just became very cumbersome, and teachers weren't well trained, and so it was poorly implemented and then just kind of faded away. But we see the big push now with STEM, right? Everybody's doing something in their school STEM related. Would you say that's true? And for some, maybe just a little piece here, and some, your entire school is now STEM. We're considered we call it stream in our school because we integrate the arts and religion, but all the STEM basics. But it's it's not just, for an hour on Friday. It's changing the whole way you teach throughout the day. And somebody was going to speak. Okay, I want to clue you in a little bit about this course because I've taught it for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 semesters over the past 3 years. And first of all, in this program, this online program that you're in, the courses are all built, the Blackboard shells and the whole course design and the syllabus is designed by certain instructors at one point in time with this program. And then those of us who come in as adjunct instructors are often teaching it, well, we're always teaching a course that we didn't design. It's like, here's the basic outline, here's the assignments, here's the textbooks. We can juggle a little bit with the timeline maybe or discussion questions, but the course is pretty much built for us. And for me, I struggled with this course in the past because this course is all about critical thinking and open-ended and being fluid and going with where your students want and need to go. And yet the whole course was rather scripted. So I felt like I'm teaching a course of critical thinking that really isn't allowing for much for these teachers who are teaching this course. Do you know what I'm saying? And then I would find the teachers who are in the course would do what our students often do. What do I need to do to get the grade? How do I get full points? And they want specifics. How many pages does it need to be? How many people do I need to respond to on the discussion board? Everybody wants like cut and dry, tell me what it is so I get my full points. That's completely, contradictory to what we're trying to do here, that focuses on the learning and you getting something out of it and not me saying, if it's not 8 pages, you're not going to get your 20 points. That kind of thing. I mean, do you see that in your own school, in your classrooms with your own kids? They want to know, give me the checkbox so I can check it off.
So I teach like an on-level class, an advanced class, and then a double advanced class. And I have 3 different preps. And it's so funny because my double advanced kids are the ones that are most like, I want a checklist. I want to make sure that I know exactly what I knew or what I need to do to get the grade and everything. Whereas like my on-level class, they're a lot more fluid. Like they are more creative for sure in some senses. And like I feel like my double advanced kids just want to take a test. Whereas like my on-level kids are much more willing and open to complete a project and instead of taking a test.
They're not obsessed with the 100% what they want.
Exactly. It's just interesting to see the difference between the different courses. And they're all 13-year-olds, so it's just.
And that's another challenge of doing critical thinking and project-based learning in a classroom is some students, I don't want to do that. I don't want to converse with people. I don't want to, come to consensus. I just want to write my paper and get it done, right? But our job is to break them out of that comfort zone and ourselves too. So that brings me to this course. I was allowed this summer to redesign it a little bit. So I got to take the course as it was and take out some of the built-in stuff that was there and redesign it for my hope is going to be more relevant and authentic for you as teachers. So the big focus, and you probably figured out because of the Giuliani text I asked you to get, the PBL playbook, is that that's where we're headed. Is that at the end of this course, we're going to be designing for yourselves a project-based learning that works in your school, in your teaching situation with the age, the population of kids that you have. And so I'm going to try to, it's kind of open-ended when we get to that point in the course on purpose, so that I would like you to be able to have more engagement in and decision-making and what is it going to look like. So I'm not going to say your project has to have this, 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 and this. We're going to do a lot of research into project-based learning and problem-based learning, the theories and the history and methodologies. And then I'm hoping to help guide you to have you make meaning for you. So it's meaningful to you, and that you're not just checking boxes and jumping through hoops so you can get your points and get your credits. So I want it to be more than that for you. So might that be frustrating? Possibly. I'm hoping I have enough guidance in there that you will feel like I kind of know what I'm supposed to do, but also you're all teachers. You're not, undergrads. So you can teach each other. You can teach me. You might have more experience in this than I do within your school with students that you can add to this course as well. So that's what I'm going to be encouraging, is that as we move, we're going to spend the first few weeks just critical thinking and what it might look like. A lot with conversation in the classroom, something called constructive conversation or argument, and how we can use that within a classroom to engage children in critical thinking. Because it really needs to happen in conversation and in problem solving and in groups. We don't do a lot of critical thinking just sitting by ourselves. We can think, but then nothing happens with it. It's about the communicating and explaining and defending and those kinds of things. So that's my cautionary. You're going to help me with this course, make it a better course, okay? So what I asked last night's group is, please be critical thinkers yourselves. Say, I don't know why we read this. This wasn't helpful. Or, you know what, here's a great website I think that should be part of it. Whatever, feel free to give me feedback. Let me know what's working, what might have been a better way to set up an assignment, what have you. So something else I wanted to say, see if I can remember it. I want to talk a little bit about critical thinking in the classroom. We tend to think it has to happen within the discipline, whatever we're teaching, the math, the science, the literature. But as a teacher, if you really want to build a culture of critical thinking in your classroom, look for ways in everyday situations where you can, instead of giving a student an answer or telling them the best way to do something, let them figure it out. An example was last night. I think it was a kindergarten teacher who, the kids all have their little cubbies and they all needed to go get their whatever, pencil box. And there was the mad dash and, they all glommed together and somebody got hurt. And so she said, back them up and say, what happened when we went about it that way? Can you think of a better way of us all getting our pencil boxes out? And then they had to come up with an idea. So I thought, that's critical thinking. Taking a real life, it seems mundane, but in kindergarten, that's a pretty big deal, right? How do you do that? And I'm going to share one more example and then see if any of you have some. Earlier this year, I happened to stop by the 8th grade classroom, 8th grade algebra. And my 8th grade math teacher is an excellent math teacher. But for the most part, she's pretty much, we're doing math, and she's been kind of getting outside of the box a little bit more as we're doing more with the stream and PBL. So when I came into the classroom, what they were doing is a group was at the front and they were presenting a better arrangement of the desks in the room. And how she told me later is that what happened is some of the kids were like, I don't like the way these desks are. I think it would be better this way. Or why can't we? And so she said, okay, I'm going to put you in groups. Your job is to design an arrangement for the desks in the room. And she gave them parameters like you have to be able to move freely, get to the door, get to the front of the room. Everybody has to be able to see the flat panel TV or certain things, and then go to it. And they and their groups came up with these creative designs, and they had to get up and present them and explain and defend why their arrangement was better and vote on it. And it was pretty interesting because kids were getting up and looking for a ruler so they could measure all the desks, and they had to measure the room and decide how much room do we need between desks so people can fit. And they started doing math. as well as talking and being creative. And she basically put her math lesson for the day aside and let them spend that one class period doing that activity. Thoughts?
I can totally piggyback off of that. I have always done flexible seating, and I have never had a problem with it. And this year, my kids are losing their minds. Like, they cannot get over the fact that they don't have a desk of their own. And we're very big with restorative circles at my school, so we had a circle talk about it. And my plea to my students was that, let's try it for a few weeks, and then we'll gather again and talk about it after we've all had a chance to sit at our different seating options. And the rushing to the pencil boxes makes me giggle, because I assign kind of like I have like a Star Wars theme in my room, so each like group has like a little Jedi that is responsible for getting materials for the group when needed. And it's interesting because it takes them a while. Otherwise, you have 17 students wanting to run to pencil boxes or to get pencils or to get markers, and it's like, no, one person needs to do this. And it's interesting because they slowly shift their mindset. And today was kind of a little bit of an aha. I had a couple kids run, and they're like, no, that's not your job. That is so-and-so's job. And so it's funny, because sometimes you think like you're not getting anywhere, but really, like, are you? Maybe you are. You just need to give them a little bit of time to make the connection and to, practice it, model it, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, talk about the mistakes. And it's a little bit of, you feel as a teacher, you're banging your head against the wall a little bit, but I mean, it is the second week of school. And for me, I'm working with 6 and 7-year-olds. So like, it takes a lot longer than if I was working with the 5th grade class or 7th grade class. So.
I think as teachers, we figure we know the best way to set up routines, and we probably have some pretty good ideas from experience. But what about the thought of stepping back and letting the kids figure out what's a good way to do such and such? So
Go ahead.
Well, my students we create our own classroom like rules that we're going to go by. So we have discussions. We first think independently about what we feel our space should look like, feel like, sound like. And then we partner up and talk with a partner and get more ideas. And then we group up into like groups of 4. And then we present some basic structure of what we want our learning environment to be. So I don't really have any rules in the classroom, because they come up with the structure for our environment to make sure everyone feels safe, responsible, and respectful for the classroom itself. So that's one way that we kind of start the year in my room.
That was almost exactly what I was going to say. We started our year with a big poster that just said, "Why are we here?" And the kids had to kind of discuss in small groups and partner groups. And then we came back and discussed just as a whole class, like, why do we come to school? Is it because we have to? Like, what do you want to get by coming here every day? And then after we did that, we made another poster that said, okay, how are we going to do all of this? Like, what do we need to do in order to do these things successfully? And we took all of the things on that poster and put it up on the wall and called it our classroom norms. So it was things like, we need to get places effectively. We need to be able to work in groups and things like that. But that's kind of the same idea, I think, that you were saying.
Did you have a lot of students say that it should be quiet? Like almost all of my students said there's no talking in school. And I was just like, oh, well, let's think about, and I thought, what are some reasons why we should talk in school? Because almost everyone said it should be silent. Everyone should be sitting down, doing their work quietly at their desk or their spot. And I was just like, oh, let's talk about that.
And where did they get that from, right?
Yeah, I did have a couple students bring that up, and I told them pretty quickly, I'm like, I freak out when you guys are silent. I think it's weird. So like, please feel free to talk to each other. Just make sure that it's constructive talking. But no, I don't like a silent classroom, because it's uncomfortable for some people to just be silent for that long, including myself, because I talk too much.
Yeah, so that kind of brings up an interesting point, because how often as adults are we like asked to be silent? So like making their experience in school like their experience in life is going to be, right? Everyone in this meeting right now, right? Your life is always predictable and it always goes the way it's supposed to, right?
Right.
No, so we want the days in school when we teach to go perfectly smooth, and we want everything to be just so, but sometimes those are the best learning opportunities to problem solve, is when a problem comes up. So I don't know. It's kind of like a fine line of, do you want everything to go smoothly all the time and not prepare students to be able to improvly problem solve? Or I don't know. It's interesting.
It's a very good point.
I use this within the curriculum. For those of you
Speak up.
am I still quiet?
There you go. Yes, you are.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll say it like this. For those of you who don't know, I do 6th, 7th, and 8th grade music, and so that's what I teach. And so I actually use this idea, though I didn't realize it. I use the first day of 6th grade, which is their first day in choir, and I really teach in a very elementary school way, although they don't know it. But the way I introduce music is all things with which they are familiar. And they learn a lot of great stuff in elementary school, but the way that we read music as adults, if any of you do, is different from how you do it as a child. And so first day, everything goes well. We try really hard to let it go well. And then the second day, I introduce something else, but I do it in a more adult way. And the students always can't do it for the most part. And I always ask them to try to identify what are the things that we're missing and what are the things that I didn't do or you didn't know how to do. And then they develop a list of the things that I'm going to work on, which pretty much are what I've planned. But it helps them realize, why do we need to know rhythm? Why do we need to identify with note names and all this stuff? Because then they know that they need it in order to produce the product. So we use it a little bit in the curriculum that way.
Say if anybody's interested, I posted a link in the chat. When we talk about project-based learning, it's sort of interesting to me. A lot of my undergrad, maybe it was similar for many of you as well, was focused on like curriculum development. And I think for many of us at this point in our careers, we feel like we can focus on the end product for a project, what it should look like, how it aligns with standards. But I think that something we need to be really cognizant of is, how do we give students the skills to be able to operate and accomplish those goals that we've set out or the project that we've established for them. And one of the interesting things that's cropped up, I talked to my brother, he works in computer programming. He's a manager for a team of computer programmers. There's a lot of really interesting models that are being used in software development, things like Kanban boards or things like Lean or Agile. Instead of that traditional waterfall method of when we think about project management in business, there's a hierarchy, right? There's someone in charge that's a boss. They'll assign a task to a worker. That worker is given an X amount of time and they just monitor it. And once that process starts, there's no feedback. There's no collaboration necessarily. There's no feedback from the customer. So that graphic, it seems a little cartoony at first, but it breaks down how we could start to show students different strategies that software development teams use. And they could start to incorporate those in their project-based learning. And they could choose from a variety of different methods, where they want to try and do something more agile-based, like the graphical show, something that's more Kanban-based. To explain Kanban really easily or quickly, it was a cool idea. It's, imagine a piece of tag board. You have sticky notes, and you can say the planning part, doing and done. And students progress and move the sticky notes, the different tasks that they have across the board as they accomplish them. Maybe you give point values. Certain things are more points, certain things are less points. So students can have an equal distribution of work. They initial off or put their names, and that way they can physically or visually monitor their progress on the project. Like, you have to pick up a certain thing to build a diorama, or a student has to be able to apply. So it's just an interesting thought anyway. I saw, and I talked to my brother about it the other day, so I thought I'd share.
Thank you. I'm going to check out that link.
But with on the smartboard, where they can just kind of click and drag their name as they're working on projects to different sections, but same idea.
Yeah.
There's a cool school down here in St. Paul called Avalon. It's a charter school. And what they have their students do there is they have like one teacher that's in a pod. They're basically like the advisory teacher. And they have, it's multi grade level. But what the students do is they'll like actually propose the project that they want to do, and they submit, and they come up with a proposal. So they kind of use the engineering design process, and they take the state standards that they want their project to meet, and that's how they actually meet their state standards, is they look through the state standard and they make their own project based upon how many standards that they could fit into that project. And Jake, what you were saying there, I think they probably use something similar to that while the students are going through the project. But the front end of that is the students picking a project and the standards that they kind of want to fit into that. And I could see kind of what you were talking about, helping out with that process. But I always found that school pretty fascinating, to where the students are coming up with their own project themselves. Mm-hmm. They come up with a proposal, and they give that proposal to 2 or 3 teachers. Plus, they actually have to find a community fits into their project of whatever it is. And the only reason I found out about it is because I was a community expert for one of the students' projects one time, and it was just a really, really cool process. So,
and that's an important piece of the PBL philosophy, is there needs to be a community that you present to. There needs to be an audience that you are going to present your project to. It needs to have relevance to real life. It needs to be authentic. You need to be communicating it. So it's not just go home, do your project, you're done. It's much more involved than that. Has more purpose.
It reminds me a lot of Genius Hour, the 20 Google project, but more aligned standards. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of that. Like, I wish the structures where they are, they do their proposal and then they can follow the structure throughout the project and then present is similar. But I like that they align it to the standards themselves. I think that's really neat.
And that's the key piece, is that we're allowing that freedom and creativity in students, and yet we still have to be responsible for making sure that there is some standards and content that they learn, because it's part of our job. But how do you find that nice happy medium? In a school like that, the school's designed for that. So obviously the administration and your peers all support that. But I think most of us probably in schools where teachers are on a huge spectrum, right? From super traditional to, all over. And it's hard if you're in a school where you don't feel like it's really supported at a systemic level. But there are little things we can still do within our classrooms, right? I think that's what you do, is you start with small things instead of trying to go whole hog, like to do that school like Avalon. That'd be awesome, but we can't do that tomorrow, right? So what can you do tomorrow? So I sort of put a challenge out to the teachers that were in the lesson last night, is I want you to go back in tomorrow or somewhere in the next week and just find an opportunity where you can step out of a traditional role and allow for some creative thinking with your students. And it might be within a subject lesson. It might be something that's more related to just real life, like the teacher with the desk arrangement. She's kind of went on an opportunity there. But look for a place where normally I would do this, but I'm going to do it this way instead and see what happens. So I'm going to challenge you to do that. Just try something you wouldn't normally do. Can anybody think off the top of their head? It's like, I think I might try. Probably next week I'll ask for, on the discussion board, if people would like to share, if you try something. A strategy or a method, it might be from what we discussed here, might be from something you take out of the readings, or you watch the video with the math talk. I'm going to try that in my classroom. And that last thing I want from you before we close for the night is, let me know right now, what do you most want to get out of this course? What will make it most useful to you? Not just as credits toward your degree, but as a teacher, what do you really want to get out of this course so that it's worth your time?
I think just the more strategies on how to use critical thinking or teach critical thinking effectively. just so that I know I'm doing it how it's supposed to be done.
I agree with you. That's what I was going to say too, is I want some strategies and concrete methods that I can use in the classroom to make sure I'm being intentional about my teaching, to make sure I'm including critical thinking times and opportunities for the students.
I also would like to know like the best ways how to assess that in a way that a parent's not going to come back and, I don't know, super mad at me about it, I guess. Or admin, I feel like they just want like some numbers to prove, to validate a score. And I think that this type of learning is better. However, it's subjective, and I feel like it can be argued, and I just don't want backlash, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the assessment is a critical piece, and it's difficult because it isn't just take a test, 9%, and you're done.
Right. And also too, like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like, this is all fine and dandy, but like I have a curriculum that has an assessment for me to print and give. Like, I mean, not to like poo-poo anything, but like I don't want to have to sit down and make my own test, or you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have the time for that. I wish I did. I wish I don't mean to be like not a team player or anything. Like, I think it's a great idea, but realistically, when we definitely get in the nuts and bolts and in the trenches of the school year, I mean, I can only be so creative for so much before I just get burned out.
I agree. We talked about that last night, actually. But I think in teaching, we're, especially nowadays with the technology and the internet, there's so much out there. So many real world teacher lessons, units, a lot of it that you can borrow from. I think that you can all relate to that you found a good idea that somebody else was doing, and then you modified it for your classroom and did a little differently, or you took pieces of this and that and put it together to make something that works for you. And that's what I envision happening, that nobody's going to start from pure scratch and say, I have to come up with my own from nothing. It's like, first of all, the more examples you can see, real examples of students and teachers in classrooms and what has worked, not just reading it out of a book, but the real stuff, and then develop your own, but use the resources that are out there.
And
I think that's what I look, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think that's what I probably find the most helpful and the most useful to any kind of class that I take, especially one that's involves critical thinking, is just the relationships you build with the people that are in the class. I mean, you're not going to be this connected to any other teacher except for the teachers that you do teach with, and oftentimes this is a little bit more connection that we have right now to some of the teachers that you teach with, just because you might not see them throughout the day, and there's just always stuff going on. So if we're all looking for things to incorporate critical thinking a little bit more into our teaching, and we're sharing them here, that's more than just one of us could do. So I just really am going to appreciate kind of all the different angles that are going to be attacked from critical thinking from all of us kind of putting in the work throughout the course. So,
and that's where it'll be key for everybody to help contribute to, the base of resources that we're going to look at. I mean, I've got lots of sources. I'm going to give you websites and such, but you may have some as well. So I'm going to urge you to, all of us contribute to this course, and you never know where that next best idea is going to come from. But I also believe that a good teacher doesn't take somebody else's idea or program or unit and just hook, line, and sinker do it exactly the same. I think we all, as good teachers, you take what will work in your room and take this from over here. Are any of you cooks? Do you ever go and you get like 5 different recipes for something, and then you just take a little piece of each one and kind of make your own? It's what I envision happening in this course, is that we'll borrow and from a lot of places, but at the end it'll be yours. So that's my plan for the course, and because I want it to be a little fluid, I might change some things as we go so that it fits what you need. and where you're at. But that's where you need to communicate with me so that the course is something that's working for all of you. Any last thoughts or questions?
Good.
Oh, real quick, last night we found out, actually I found out through the student information form, but one of our peers in this course, Annie, is in a school, it's in Minnesota, I want to say Edina, I'm not sure, but Giuliani, who is the author of the text I had you by, is a parent in her school. He has 4 children in her school. And he just PD for their teachers. I'm like, see if you can get him to come to our next Zoom session, because that would be pretty cool. Then that was just, serendipity. I had no idea that that was going to happen. I mean, I just have used the playbook myself and thought it's a very useful tool for teachers. And then here's one of our peers who teaches his student, which would be like really stressful, right? No pressure. So we'll sign off for now. I appreciate all of you being able to be here. I know it's a little later back there for you, and it is that hard time of the school year. So hang in there, keep your nose above the water. And I'll see you on the discussion board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if
Thanks,
you
guys. Have a good semester.
we'll see you again. Grant is laughing.
Oh, sorry, my computer just knocked me off right before you left. Did I miss any of the last final things?
I shared a couple things. Let me stop recording so I can just chat with you. Okay? Where do I do that? Stop.